Batu, Marana, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your captain, and the star date is August 2021, and we're going to be talking Star Trek: The Motion Picture today. And as always, I'm joined by my number one, Julian. I don't know why I put myself in charge there. I'm really sorry. That just came up.
It's okay. I mean, I'm here to figure out the secrets of life, the universe, and everything. And is there something more? And this movie will do that for me. I'm sure by the end of these 2 hours, we will have figured everything out.
Hopefully, yeah. I did go straight for the sort of Shatner level narcissism there.
No worries.
Or even the Kirk level sort of like arrogance of this film, actually, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, we are talking about Star Trek: The Motion Picture from 1979, starring the original. At least mostly the original crew: William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, DeForest Kelley, James Doohan, and Michelle Nichols, and all. I don't want to sort of leave out George Takei, Walter Koenig, all these, and then sort of others just sort of brought in, and without even being given a red shirt, clearly indicating, all right, you've got enough relevance at this film, but no backstory. You're dead.
Yeah. I mean, and sadly so, because I think that Decker and Ilya are two of the most fascinating characters, and they were going to be part of Star Trek Phase 2, and I really want to see more of them.
I agree, actually. That I was really like the ending of this. If this film was like the culmination of another story, the ending would feel a lot more impactful.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get to it anyway. But let's start with Star Trek: The Motion Picture. What are your initial thoughts? Having watched it recently.
Well, I love this movie. I've always loved this movie.
Ooh.
And I think that the traditional view of the Star Trek movies is that the even ones are good and the odd ones are bad. And I think this is pretty universally recognized as the best of the odd ones. And so that would put it like fourth in terms of quality. There's no doubt it has problems, but I think it is in some ways the most mature of all six. I think it's searching. It's about something. It has that classic Trek, like, wanting to really get at something. And when you think of like how popular the Singularity has become since, it's way on top of that in 78. And, whether humanity exists to sort of bootstrap, a sort of robotic AI consciousness, it's there in 78. So I think it's ambitious. It's about something. And there are ideas in here. I love that it's an anticlimax. I mean, there's a lot in here that I really love. What about you?
No, I'm the same. And I think it's interesting, like I say, this is clearly, well, I'm not saying clearly, I assume the release of this or the green lighting of this is a direct result of Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they didn't go, Star Wars is a big success, can we have like the crew of the Enterprise back in some rip-roaring adventure, for an hour and a half? They didn't. They said, no, we're going to bring them back. And yeah, we're going to basically send them on a two-hour plus classic Trek episode.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to explore themes, and we are really going to sort of dig into some big ideas and challenge some of the characters. And I was like, so I do enjoy this film. I think there's a 70s feel to it as well. Like we've recently just done The Man Who Fell to Earth, and we've never done it, and maybe we'll get to it one day. But even like before, like 60s stuff, like 2001, and some of these other, like, more contemplative sort of sci-fi films, it definitely feels more it's falling into that camp rather than going for the action, which will come with this franchise. But
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I found myself thinking, like, one of the biggest criticisms of this film is that it doesn't have that kind of action, and obviously Star Wars is packed with it. This is, obviously the sort of climax is an anticlimax. It's a conversation, for God's sake, about existence and reality and unintended consequences. I think that's fantastic. I think the set there is fantastic. I think that, I mean, not to jump ahead, but the pain on Ilya's face, this construct is just haunts me. And I like that it doesn't have that kind of action. I like that it, I've obviously we've gotten to the point where, and I think Star Wars is to blame for a lot of this, where we have these climaxes that go on and on and on, and every 5 minutes we've got to have a new action scene, and this movie does not care about any of that. And so for me, if anything, this movie gets more and more refreshing over time.
No, I agree, because weirdly, I mean, I went back and I looked. I haven't watched them all, but I didn't watch any of them. I watched this and I went through. I was just listing through the Trek films, and I've got most of them. And I came to the conclusion quite quickly. Actually, I was like, oh my god, I'm a Trekkie rather than a Star Wars fan. I definitely lean this way, and I think you're right. I think there's a correction in place with Wrath of Khan, and some of the rest of the series, but the series still manages to maintain. Maybe not 4. 4 is a bit different, but overall, I think it's an 80s comedy, but mainly I think this franchise sort of manages to maintain a certain Trek-ness about it. And avoid those sort of like the pulpy action and the sort of that a lot of others fall into. And I do blame sort of Star Wars for that a little bit. And then that become an 80s thing. So no, to watch this film now, I was like, oh yeah, no, this film, the height of the action in this film is Spock using a jetpack to go through an entranceway.
Yeah,
and they have a tense countdown from before his jetpack goes off. Like, that's about it. But I love it, and I do. I love some of the stuff. It's a character piece, really. So no, I do. I agree. I find some of this refreshing. There's some bits that's clearly a little bit too self-indulgent, I would say, where it does start to lose me. The first one really being. What do you say about the sets? I love the sets. I love the model work in this as well. I love all the model work. I love the ships. I love the sort of space stations, all that stuff. It's fantastic. I love it. Absolutely love it. Even the V'Ger massive super ship at the end is amazing. And I've got a Transformers question about this film later on. But
I do too.
Yeah. The moment when you've got Scotty and Kirk on the little transporter ship.
Shuttlecraft. Yeah.
The little shuttlecraft, and they're sort of basically you basically get 8 minutes or so of them just going, look at Enterprise. It's like this weird sort of like almost
veneration.
Yeah.
I have a few things to say about that. I mean, I do think that goes on too long for sure, but I also think more than any franchise in history, Star Trek has a veneration for that ship.
Yes.
Battlestar Galactica, it's like, okay, that ship's cool, but the Battlestar Galactica is cool, but nobody venerates it the way they do the Enterprise. And the Enterprise, there's that cliche of like, the city is a character. Well, the Enterprise is a character. The Enterprise matters. And it's true that goes on too long. I also found myself thinking, when you see the Enterprise in space dock as they're going past it, and the music swells, and this Goldsmith music is amazing. And
yes,
I can't stop thinking of Next Gen because they reuse the theme for the Next Gen theme. Yeah, and I've seen approximately 4,000 hours of Next Gen. it occurred to me, this is the first time that they're doing this, right? It's the first time we're seeing the Enterprise in space dock, undergoing repairs with, and that becomes such a cliche almost of the series going forward, even in subsequent shows. This sort of the majesty of going up and seeing that ship being repaired and the possibilities that it represents. So yes, it goes on too long. I think that the weakest sequence in the whole thing for me is the wormhole sequence, where suddenly there's like an asteroid in there, we're going to hit it with, how did that get there? Because the wormhole was created by going to warp with a, ship that wasn't ready. I mean, and there are a lot of sort of like 2001-esque or wannabe 2001-esque sequences where you're just seeing sort of computer graphics or, something like that going through V'ger, where it's like, some of that stuff is good, but some of it's like, okay, 2 minutes of like, corridors.
There's little bits and pieces that I that I really like. So again, okay, on the shuttlecraft, them going and sort of, like you say, that veneration, sort of the moment of the ship, do it. I've got no problem because it is cool, and you are being reintroduced to a character. Like you say, every other character gets a moment. Pretty much, that you're reintroduced to all the original characters, and the ship is, as you say, one of them and deserves that moment. But it still goes on too long. And then there are other moments, like you say, the bit where they're all warping and it's going slow. Like it doesn't pay off. It doesn't really matter enough to be what it is. And again, the same way, like you say about V'ger, when they're going into V'ger, again, the model work is astounding. Like someone's had to sit and make this thing. Like there is no computer effects in this. There's no CG. It's all done with perspective and other bits and pieces, like and different screenings. But I love the fact that it gives a piece of scale. There's a shot from above of Enterprise traveling through the V'ger ship, and I love that because it gives you this idea of how absolutely massive this ship is, or this V'ger sort of like thing is. But again, like you're like, yeah, 30 seconds of that, I've got what you're telling me. I'm sort of a sophisticated audience. I get what you're telling me. You don't need to keep going with this. And it's the same with the Spock thing when he goes through, and they're clearly trying to emulate the 2001 thing where he's in the cloth and he's like, there are planets and this and that, and I'm like, I get it. You don't need to explain everything. Like this is going on to, and so I think there's almost like a masturbatory stuff to this of like, look what we can do. Look, we're clever. We can do wondrous things. You can, but you don't need too much of a good thing. Almost, we're like, I'm bored of this by now. So I think it has a tendency to do that.
It's hard because so much of what I like about this movie is that it is philosophical, is that it is, and it is indulgent of those sequences. One of the reasons why Star Trek, is greater than Star Wars is because there's a sense of speed, right? There's a sense of place. There's not a sense of like, we'll be there in 20 minutes. How fast are you going? Doesn't matter, time, that's one of the reasons why Star Wars is science fantasy is so much fun, is because, all right, we're at Alderaan, but so, in real life, of course, we don't have warp drive, but the distances we're talking about are so vast. And I do have questions about how vast V'ger is, but I do like that they have this sense of journey, this sense of human discovery. But as you say, it does feel like it goes on too long. I could live, look, Interstellar, Ad Astra, which is horrible. Those have long sequences, of the ships against black, and they work. But I do think this goes on too long, and it goes on too long for me. It's not necessarily that I need less time. It's that like Spock going through and seeing the planets looks amazing. But then there are other shots that are just like, smoke and corridors and, and it's like, okay, a minute of that I do not need.
Yes. It's about the pacing. It's about this thing of like, as an editor or even as a director, you're like, okay, this is what you're right in that, like, if you had, say, just 3 sequences that were indulgent in that way, you could revel in that those moments of indulgence because there's only 3 of them. but it seems to sort of they just seem to do it a lot. And again, they sort of, because they're also trying to, I feel they're also sort of hampering it with this a similar pacing in the character story. So you get this sort of, like, you know, the languid pacing around these massive moments. The look at the ship, the thing with the asteroids and Spock, and then with V'Ger. And if it was just that, it's fine. But then throughout the film, you get these like hanging shots on people's faces, like again and again, where like, and especially Ilya and Captain what's his name? It's Beckett. Decker. Yeah, you get, you know, those things that just lingers on their faces and stuff, and you're like, you know, right, this is now where you are being indulgent. Like, you need this or the other, or at least bring them both down. So it doesn't know when to stop, and that's I think the part of the problem.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that if, like, when you're going through V'Ger, if you had more of sort of the close-ups on those walls, and you see the intricate machinery, that kind of thing, where you're like, oh wow, we are in this massive place and it is so alien. And that's one thing this movie does right, is V'Ger is so alien. You know, I could be much more entertained by that, of sort of watching those details and thinking, what does this mean? What are they getting into? And letting my mind go with that in that pace. But, you know, I always go back to that wormhole sequence where that seems to me it's only there to put like a little bit of drama in that moment, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't serve any purpose in terms of plot. I mean, there is a moment where V'Ger is shooting at them and then they get through and it dissipates before it strikes them. So it's clear to me that they're trying to add drama to a story that centrally nothing happens, right? You know, we go to V'Ger and we have a conversation. I mean, that's the plot in one sentence.
It's the thing is as well. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was thinking about this as I was watching it, that there is technically a ticking clock in this film, because V'Ger is heading to Earth. The whole point is that V'Ger, this message they get, this sentient being that they've seen coming towards them, this massive entity, is coming to Earth, and you figure, you are told it's looking for its creator, or the creator, and so you are left to think, is this God and this other thing? And we'll get into that idea in a bit. But there's a ticking clock of it's going to reach Earth, and it's got this sort of this. They've given it this this level of power. You know, it can emanate this much power, this much sort of you know, whatever. And then someone actually says, well, you couldn't generate that with 1,000 starships. So they give you this idea of how powerful V'Ger is, and you go, okay, heading towards Earth. But at no point does that ticking clock ever really feel like it has stakes. And I think, you know, if you were to redo this in the modern film, you'd be like, right, V'Ger's so massive, even from this distance, it's a fact in gravity, it's a fact in the tides, it's doing something to the planet Earth. Even V'Ger's presence in the solar system is having an effect. Like, there needs to be some sort of stakes. Never comes up. And it just feels like, again, like the ticking clock. What's it going to do? It's not until the very end, or no, close to the end, that you're actually told that V'Ger wants to use all the carbon entities as data pods or whatever. So you think, okay, it's going to try and wipe out that should all be right at the beginning. Like, and that's the other part of the pacing. Like, information drops keep coming at odd moments.
Yeah, well, I mean, I traditionally like the sort of like peeling of the onion slow reveal in movies. But you're right. I mean, there isn't that same sense of stakes. I mean, this is so, like, people love Star Trek First Contact, right? With the Borg and Picard. That's, yeah, I mean, it's a horrible movie structurally, but it right away it sets, here's the stakes. You know, these you know, weirdly alien things that are semi-mechanical are going to Earth, and right away it's Earth is at stake. This movie has that same thing, but you never feel like it, and you're completely right. It's sort of implied, because you see the sort of digitized starships that are destroyed at the beginning, that V'Ger is, in destroying them, it's like Captain Power, you know, digitizing them, like it's creating a scan of it that is made manifest inside it. And you see whole planets. So there is this implication that it may have destroyed a swath of planets on its way. Wouldn't the Federation have heard of this?
Yeah, that sort of, because the
would have
thing
been
is
a way to set those stakes early on,
exactly,
right?
like I'm thinking
Unicron.
Yeah, exactly what I was going to say. Like this is a Unicron moment, or like Galactus or something. Like you need a herald. There's something that needs to come back. You need, and again, I know I do this, and I'm sorry if I keep this, but like those three, because they're birds of prey, aren't they? They're Klingon birds of prey that get destroyed at the beginning. Like why that doesn't seem to have more of an issue. Like the Klingons should be like raging about this thing. Like it should be like we've got to deal with this. Now is it coming to our planet? But the Klingons are coming as well. Like because it pissed them off. But I think a better version of this, sorry, and is that it's actually a Klingon bird of prey limps into and gets found by the Federation, a Federation ship, and it is then like we had to help the Klingon. They were so scared of this thing they couldn't have. They actually they asked for Federation help. That's how big of a problem this is, and it's headed this way. Something that it doesn't have. I don't. You haven't got to see it destroying planets and stuff because I think that's obviously costly and it's not the drama or the spectacle they want. But if you're like, we couldn't do anything. The thing's massive and it's coming to the extent that the Klingons are going, we've got to talk to the Federation about this.
Yeah, I mean, I would just have it destroying planets. I mean, I would have the planet can disappear in a glow like those ships do. But I mean, you're right that there should be more of a sense of the politics with the Klingons. You could even have like some Klingon survivor out in space who they encounter, like you're saying, or even encounter inside V'ger. But to give a sense of stakes right away and have like obviously with today's effects, it would be like, okay, here's the fleet of ships out to defend this planet. Watch V'ger just destroy all of them, and then the entire planet is dead. And it's like, we've got a better course reading, Admiral. It's headed straight to Earth. Cue title sequence, right? This should be a no-brainer. But you're right that it's remarkable how low those stakes feel, even though clearly all of Earth is in jeopardy and there is this ticking clock. And there are moments where they reference this, right? I mean, like he says, I think the feud between Kirk and Decker is masterfully done, and I really love it. But it's subtle. And one of the reasons for keeping Decker on is, and for that feud is the ticking clock. But it has this sort of like weird Solaris like stoicism of all of the characters where it's like, yes, we're operating under a ticking clock. The Earth will be destroyed in approximately 40 hours. So maybe keep your thoughts to yourself, Decker. Why are you talking like that?
It's true. Again, and this is where, and I know this is a first outing as a film and they're trying to do something. And you get like the characters again, like, it's great to see Shatner as Kirk and Spock and, Nimoy as Spock and DeForest Kelly as McCoy. Like I enjoy seeing them, especially McCoy. Like I think I've always liked McCoy's crankiness. Like I aspire to be him at a point in time. That's my dream. But I love seeing them. But you're right. Like Spock being logical about all this and almost being indifferent to the ticking clock. It's fine because it makes sense. You'd be like, he's looking for this truth. He's looking, logically. He's like, well, this is what I'm looking for and stuff. And they even say like at one point, his mission is not directly linked to ours. Like he's looking for the truth. We're trying to protect Earth. Can he be trusted? But yeah, at no point does McCoy sort of like kick off with Spock to say, you heartless elf, like, there's billions of people's lives at stake here and all you caring about is your own search for the truth. Like at no point is that confrontation come to the fore when it should. Like, it clearly, there are points when like, like you say, it just feels a bit more like they're going out for a country drive a little bit at times. And they're like, well, we are going to see this crazy thing, but
Here we might be running up against the strengths and weaknesses of Roddenberry's approach. because Roddenberry was given a phenomenal degree of control of this film. And so just to sort of like back up, Star Trek was one of the first shows that got a third season because fans wrote in, it was saved. And then Roddenberry kind of didn't pay much attention through the third season. And then they did this animated show, and it was, a hit for animated shows in the 70s. And so, they saw these conventions getting started, and, the studio was eager to do a movie and then couldn't get a script that they liked with Roddenberry. They shifted to a TV show. And then the success of Star Wars and also Close Encounters of the Third Kind, not being a kick-ass science fantasy thing, helped convince Paramount to, fund it as a picture. And they took the script for the 2-part pilot episode in Thy Image and turned it into, with massive edits, turned it into this. But Roddenberry was given a lot of control. And one of Roddenberry's best parts of his ideas is this idea of stories being about something. And I adore that. And this is the most Roddenberry of the 6 movies in that sense. But also Roddenberry hated the idea of conflict between the crew members. Even, Bones telling Spock, like, you lily liver, you cold-blooded Vulcan, you don't care if we all die as long as you collect your precious data. That, Roddenberry let that stuff get on the original show, but the idea was that, look, man, in the future, when these are people, they're not being paid, they're doing this for the sheer love of it, they're not going to fight amongst themselves. And so all of those plots were historically resisted by Roddenberry and the old guard. So it's possible that Roddenberry toned that stuff down, and he was replaced for Star Trek II. I mean, in fact, Roddenberry supposedly thought Star Trek II should not be in continuity, which is madness, right?
Yeah, it's clear. I mean, it's interesting that when you watch this, that is clear that there's like a complete lack of interpersonal conflict between the crew, and I'm fine with that to an extent. Because again, this is a group of people that they went on this crazy adventure, 5 years, deep space, exploring and adventuring and all sorts of stuff. Like, they trust each other, they know each other, so there's a bond there. And so I'm completely comfortable with this idea of them trusting each other. And so there's less interpersonal conflict. However, if you are going to introduce something that is world ending, you then need to be able to have an element of interpersonal conflict about that. The whole point of that trinity of characters, of Kirk, Spock. And I haven't watched the original series in quite a few years, and I used to love it, and I will go back to it one day. But the original, I always remember that, for me, that original trinity of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy was supposed to represent different elements. Like Spock is logic, and so he was supposed to be that cool, level-headed science officer. And McCoy was that thing around heart and compassion, like to almost like a grouchy thing. But then you've got the bravado and the bollocks of Kirk, and so it was this idea of these 3 elements, and together they fought that like this perfect trinity that could resolve all these issues. But between them, you needed to have those things in conflict for him to say, no, you're right, so your way is probably better, let's do that, and come to the conclusion. But with this, it literally happens in a heartbeat, like several times. Even with Decker like points something out, and Kirk just goes, nope, you're right, okay, move on. And it's like, what? I know you're supposed to, Roddenberry wants to have this idea of this utopian future of these evolved people, but like, you can't have that and then have Kirk take over the ship based on some flimsy excuse of I've got more experience than you. It's like, no. You're clearly doing this because you want to be on the ship.
No, that's true. But I mean, look, Kirk piloted the Enterprise. This is the same ship, right? It's still NCC 1701, right? It's not even A. And, it's just been retrofitted. And Kirk has encountered so many beings, that are like,
Yeah.
threatening Earth, tremendous, I mean, he has acquitted himself well. I totally buy that with the Earth potentially in jeopardy, they want him back in charge. Having said that, like, I love that conflict, but part of why with Decker, because Kirk has to swallow his ego, but he does it, like you say, right? The problem is when you remove those fights, there isn't the drama.
Yeah.
And so instead, what you see is like, oh, wait a minute. Kirk, of all people, is being like a mature human being and saying, like, yeah, you're right. You were quite right to countermand my orders with a wormhole thing. I don't know the ship as well as you. I still think it's better off with me in command, and Starfleet agrees, but I rely on you now to represent another point of view. And from then on, he never listens to Decker again.
Yeah.
But I love this, like, oh, wait, you can have a mature sensibility. I mean, that actually is probably the most captain-like I've ever seen Kirk behave in the entire show's history.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that. But then it just seems so placid. And that's sort of where, because it sort of spikes and then returns to a status quo. So, like, when he does tell Decker he's taken over, and I agree, the reason for him taking over is fine, but he doesn't. It's not like the Federation didn't come to him and say, "We think you should be in charge of this ship," because of this situation. He went to the Federation and basically said, "I'm taking the ship." And had to convince them, and they said that there's obviously someone. Even Scotty makes a comment on you had to convince her, and he's like, "Well, that was tough," and they laugh about it. So it wasn't like a foregone conclusion. Like, he's had to convince them and bluff his way in. And so I'm like, so he wanted this. That's Kirk. That's the bravado. That's the sort of, like, that we know and love. And so when he tells Decker, and Decker's like. Decker clearly knows there's that confrontation, and Decker clearly knows why he's done it. Because Decker's like, "Oh, come on, you're telling me you got this 5 years experience. Yeah, all right, it's your shit, whatever." And he tries to sort of placate him by saying, "No, I want you here to be my sort of number one," which it feels like this is the first time you get that commander captain relationship, which I don't think really exists. Obviously. You get with Riker in Next Gen, and this feels like that is almost like the birth of that as a relationship, as a.
You do get it in the Cage, right? Literally, number one is the female.
Yes.
Number one.
But it's never again. It doesn't really come
Right.
back again
Yeah.
until Next Gen, does it? But so it feels to make sense. But there's still that resentment, and you see it through Decker a few times when he keeps pointing things out to Kirk. And I'm not saying I want him to fight across the bridge, or I'm not looking for J.J. Abrams levels of conflict, but I want it to be a little bit more of a clash of personalities, where it takes more than him pointing out that I'm supposed to be here to challenge you, and Kirk going, "You're right, you are right." It's like it just feels too easy again. Where I'm like, I do like their relationship. I do like. And I like how it escalates to the ending makes sense, but it still feels too placid as a relationship.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is I keep coming back to Roddenberry because you're quite right. Even the sort of classic trinity there is not there with McCoy. I mean, you kind of get a couple scenes. It's more important that he's scared of the transporter than that he really challenges anybody.
Yeah.
But this sounds to me like it sounds like this is all Roddenberry to me. And I think you're right about all of this. But what amazes me is this is so antithetical to the original show. That the original show, obviously, when the Cage wasn't picked up, part of the, they did a second pilot, which was unheard of. But, they wanted to cast a more appealing leading man and have it more action-y. And it is true, every single episode of the original Star Trek has a fight scene in it, even if it is the most gratuitous, So, the irony is the original Star Trek would have gone for that Abrams-like thing. It's like every one of the things that as a writer, I mean, I think the original Star Trek, much like the original Twilight Zone, I see as a writer how structurally well done those episodes are typically. But one thing that I really love about them as a writer is that they go for that entertainment. They go for that fight scene. And it's not a dumb fight scene usually, but I mean, they're not scared to kill off a character. And it's like, oh, Spock's dead. Spock or Kirk die every 10th episode.
Yeah.
And then there's a twist and you find, but they're not scared to go for that kind of like pulpiness in the midst of these grand plots that we, that still live in our heads and in all of sci-fi history. And this movie really is not interested in that stuff that, you're citing as the Abrams stuff, but that, Abrams picked up and then multiplied by 5 or something.
Yeah, basically took it to Star Wars levels. But it's again, I'm not. You're right. There are fights, but there's never an excuse for a fight in this film. I'm sure they could have, like you say, shoehorned one in quite easily. But even like human conflict on that sort of like facing off, it never reaches that level. And I agree, it must be the Roddenberry thing. And so it's that fine line. I'm glad it doesn't go full, crazy action, and yeah, I'm glad it doesn't go the full pulpy route, because it would feel incongruous with what they're trying to say and what the film's about. But again, it just if you're not going to have it as physical violence, you at least want to feel stakes, and like there's going to be human drama, like there's got to be something else. And it never quite boils enough for me to be sort of like, these characters are feeling something.
Yeah, it sort of occurs to me that all of these conflicts are, and even all of the characters' arcs are sort of like done as if they're grace notes. They're not, every character has an arc, right? I mean, Kirk gets his, he has to he gets his command back, but he has to suck up his ego. Spock has this brilliant arc where by the end of it, he's not the same character. I mean, he's rejected Kolinahr, which is weird. It occurs as an adult in here and as a kid in the Abrams movie, but okay, whatever. And then, I'm such a geek. Then, by the end, he's crying out of sympathy for V'Ger. And he says, V'Ger was much as I was when I came on board, meaning he's no longer that, Trinity guy who's just the logical guy. Not that he really ever was, but, and, the Ilya Decker love interest thing of like, you left me, could you have said goodbye? They get one conversation about that.
Yeah.
That should be more of a subplot, right? There should be more tension there. And I love that subplot. I love those characters. They don't do much with it. And so it seems as if, like, I don't know, like has somebody just revised this script over and over again until all of those moments are just whittled down to these little grace notes?
I think so, because for me, that's how I saw it. And for me, like I say, watching this, talking about Ilya and Decker, like there's a sweetness to them. There really is, and I think it plays well because they're both quite young and attractive people. But there's this sort of like this backstory that's never really explored of like, oh, I worked on her homeworld and sort of like she's this brilliant. She come through the Federation or the Academy. She's brilliant, and there's clearly this admiration, mutual admiration, as well as a crush or whatever. Like you don't know what relationship they've had for a while, and then obviously a little bit is illuminated later. But there should be again this thing of, is this Kirk should be challenging me like, you're my Decker. Is this going to be a problem? Well, no, of course it's not, because there's no interpersonal conflict in Roddenberry's future. All right, so that's not going to be addressed. We're not worried about it. So it just feels like there's not that thing. But again, it just needs it to make it the stakes feel. So when she's taken, it should be like a heart-stopping moment. That should be a gut punch. She should have been almost becoming part of the crew. You'd want like her and Michelle, Uhura becoming Pally, and like, almost like she should start to feel like she's modeling with, and then taken. But like the fact that she's just taken, you're like, oh, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, nobody mourns for her, and
No,
when she comes
not even
back
Decker.
as an android, which is quite delightful, and I love all of that stuff. Decker seems mildly miffed at it. Nobody ever says like it's terrible she's dead. There's not even one line in there.
Yeah, like not until the end, and it's when Kirk makes his announcement about their death, but like it never feels like, because let's be clear, like there's moments where you could be like, okay, this thing entering the ship and taking her, could it have been avoided? Like, should someone be blaming somebody else? Is there going to be conflict around that? Nope, she's taken, and it's almost like everyone just walks away, and Kirk picks up her tricord and sort of hands it off, and you're like, well, this is somber. Nope, move on to the next scene.
Well, it is kind of, but it's strange, those same choices. Like, you remember there's the assembly of the entire crew in that sort of, giant room, which is, new for this version of the Enterprise. And they could not have afforded that kind of set on the original show. So that's one of these like, aha, we're doing it as a big budget movie moment. And they watch, outside of the original group of like Klingons getting destroyed, you watch a Federation fleet ship be destroyed. And everybody turns to Kirk. And it's this great moment. I love this moment. I love that set. Everybody turns to Kirk, and this is his first moment where they're looking to him as their captain, as the new captain, right?
Yeah.
Who's going to lead them into the unknown and the high chance of death. And he just says, like, back to your post, and walks away. And I think we're supposed to feel like kind of let down by that, but at the same time, again, like the old Kirk would have said, Bones, is there something I could have done? Sort of dramatic. But with that tricorder scene and Ilya being taken away, you sort of feel like, oh no, this movie just doesn't want to go there. It's not that Kirk is struggling to find his sea legs. It's just that this movie does, in a weird way, like this movie's undergone the Kolinahr.
It's very cold towards its characters, because they don't even try and do anything. Like, she's taken, and so, but there's no one like, and again, it becomes space babble, but like, get on the scan. Are there any life signs out there? Can you track Ilya's life sign or something? They don't even attempt it. Like, there's nothing. They're just like, oh, she's gone. That's unfortunate. Like, it doesn't have. And this is where I think, like you say, Roddenberry knows what his vision is, but he can't do dramatic entertainment, which is what a film's got to be, because that's the point in this entertainment. And because it feels so cold, it fails in pulling me in certain ways. I don't want Decker falling to his knees with a big no. That's too far. But there needs to be some repercussions. And you said about this film is about consequences. All right, show me some consequences of smaller actions of the crew throughout the film, so that when we get to the big, centuries wide consequences, you can have it relate to the people of the film. It's simple stuff.
Yeah, and you also want to feel. You also want to feel at the end of this movie like, wow, they got out of this by the skin of their teeth. And if it wasn't for a point in Kirk, the Earth would have been destroyed and things would have gone very differently, right? That's the hero's journey, right?
Yeah.
You want to feel that. You don't feel that at the end of the movie, right?
No.
You just feel like, oh, well, that has been resolved. Let us continue into space. Yeah, so you're quite right. And I keep thinking of Star Trek II, which, certainly goes for that action and goes for those human moments, where Scotty's, nephew is killed.
Yeah.
And Scotty shows up on the turbo lift just holding the body, and he's broken up, and he says something like, these are the consequences, right? Yes, we survived, but there's a moral remainder here. And there's no attempt to do that with Ilya being taken.
No, no, and again, like, you say about the moral remainder. There's nothing in this film. This film is cold to morality. Like it's not talking about. It's an intellectual film. And we'll get to this idea of sentience actually in a minute. But that's what it is, isn't it? You are following Spock, really. I mean, this is the idea of you start with him on that having the I can't even pronounce it, Kulinar.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes, this idea of him sort of trying to get to pure logic and then sort of breaking down and stuff throughout the film. But the film, like I say, even the result, even the resolution to the problem at the end is all very easy. There's a thing I watch on YouTube, and it's called pitch meetings, and it's sort of they run through the plot in a silly way for films, and they have a phrase, and it says sort of barely an inconvenience, sort of well, that must be incredibly difficult. No, not at all, barely an inconvenience. That's how the ending of this film feels. It's like, oh, we figured it out. If you've got the code, we've got the code. Oh, the wire's not working because it doesn't. I've got a question about that. The wire's not working, right? So it's all right. I'm gonna merge with it. Hang on, no. Like it's just so sort of like, well, if that's not the answer, this is the answer. And I know you say about like Ilya's the reaction of her looking to Decker and this emotional look, but there's no kind of fixation then going, and I know maybe it's cheap and poor people's like this idea of like maybe the machine was more human than we are, sort of thing, like. None of it. Like, there's no repercussions. And Decker even says, like, "No, I want this." Mm-hmm. Do you? Do you? What has told me before this scene that you are willing to do this? Nothing, because we've not had any human conflict.
Yes, I mean he's not broken up by her death. I mean, and I kept wondering when he's tasked with sort of following the android Ilya around, like, I know it's not going to happen because I've seen this 800 times, but. Mm-hmm. Is he going to have a moment where he's like, God damn, like you've killed the real woman, where you just see that rage or that that lip sort of curl as he's holding back
a resentment towards her,
because I mean he's got to parade this this being around the ship and he's very good at it. It's like again he's that Roddenberry character who's like, I will do my duty, damn it. But because we don't see that, there is no characterization for why he sort of spontaneously decides. And again, I like this. I like that conversation at the end. I like that it's not such a grand thing, that it's not endless obstacles and, a fight. But because it's not characterized, because you don't have those character moments, it doesn't feel like a emotional payoff the way it should.
Yeah.
I want more with Decker and Ilya. I mean, Ilya comes from a planet, very Roddenberry character, where they have sex at the drop of a hat, right? Yeah. So for them to serve on a ship, very Roddenberry. Roddenberry was all. You can see either a perv, who there have been a lot of allegations about, frankly, about his pervy behavior on set, but also very sex positive. Women are not shamed in Roddenberry's universe, but this sounds like that pervy little side of Roddenberry going like, okay, Star Trek Phase 2, we're gonna have a woman who she's sex crazed, they have to take a vow of celibacy just to serve on a ship because of the chaos that would be created otherwise. I mean, that's awesome. That could be either horrible or really fascinating. And obviously, as a past with Decker is intended to be, and it's confirmed, that he is the son of Decker, the Captain Decker from the Doomsday Experiment. So his father died serving along, with Kirk, trying to take down a giant threat. No mention of that. No mention of any backstory. There's so much potential there that this movie just doesn't care about.
No, I mean, I want to come into costume in a second, but one of the things that's striking me as we talk about this is this idea that Roddenberry has, that these are more evolved social creatures, these humans. The fact of the matter is, fine, that's fine. I don't mind that so much. And it's a great and grand, beautiful idea of the utopian future where we are, we have sort of sorted out all the world's problems and we're now going off into space to solve everybody else's problems, which still sounds a bit like a colonizer idea. But, that's besides the point. It's a wonderful utopian future. We are not living in that wonderful utopian future, and we like drama. That's what we gain entertainment from. So whilst it's a beautiful vision, it doesn't marry up to the needs or the desires of an audience. And that's why I think you then get Wrath of Khan, which is exactly the opposite, which is solely driven by revenge. And, one of the most heartfelt moments of the entire Trek franchise is of Spock sacrificing himself and sort of, the moment of like, I will always be your friend. It's the complete opposite of this film. And so I think that one of the most frustrating things is we were talking about something else before we recorded. We were talking about Space Dandy. And you said in that like it's about 30 degrees off. It's wonderful, it's amazing and weird, but like there's moments where you're like, I'm not sure this is right. And again, this film is just about 10 degrees off being a really, really good film.
Yes. No, this movie is, I don't feel the need to remake Star Trek 2. I mean, Star Trek 2 is as near perfect as most movies ever get.
Yeah.
And amazing from a writerly standpoint, from an acting standpoint, all of it. I'm fascinated by 3, but there's a version of 3 I might remake. But more than anything, Star Trek 1 begs for a remake. It begs for... It's got so many great ideas and so many great characters and so many great moments. But you're right, they're all sort of weirdly toned down, or, it avoids this drama in a way that doesn't make sense. That, it's like that need not take away from the human adventure, from the philosophical content. And damn it, I'm an American, and that's what we're supposed to be good at, is merging, the action with the philosophy in a way that is a package that you can sell to people, but has some depth. This movie does not want to be that movie.
No, and that's not, like you say, I don't, when watching it, I don't ever go, like, this is rubbish. I'm enjoying it again, like I think, and I think it is carried again, like, everyone rips on Shatner, like, Shatner becomes, and he's happy, I think, with his place and his lot in all these things. Like, he's clearly made enough money that he's a bit like, don't care. But like, I'm not gonna lie, his charisma in this clearly carries a lot. And there's a reason he was chosen to play Kirk. And he has got a likability and an affability that you are able to follow. So it works on that front. I'm enjoying watching him in this, the thing that lives on his head. More than happy to watch. And the same with Nimoy. Like, Nimoy is really good. He's excellent in this. And there's a scene between the three of them when you do get the Trinity. And Kirk's obviously Spock has obviously gone through the Kolinahr, and he's still sort of having this, he's still this cold, logical being, sort of like he hasn't broken away from that, wasn't sort of, de-iced from it. And, McCoy keeps prodding him and sort of like little ribs at him to try and sort of break through. And you can see that there's a mutual respect there, but like it's there to try and break the ice. And Kirk just saying to him, like, sit down. And he's like, he just doesn't listen. And then he's like, look, there's almost like the one moment of humanness where he's like, look, sit down. And then, and just seeing the three of them, I'm like, I'm really liking this scene.
Yeah.
It works. And it ends with McCoy saying, are you sure his mission is aligned to ours? And it's a nice little moment of tension where you're like, oh yeah, hang on. Is Spock to be trusted? And then you get the bit where he goes and sort of takes the suit and the jetpack and stuff. And so there's little moments like that where I'm like, no, there are good ideas. Like you say, there are good, even for drama in this. There are moments and there are beats where you go like, this is just a couple of degrees off being a fantastic film. Like,
Yeah, and that moment, that question about Spock. I mean, first of all, that happened on the original series all the
Yeah.
time. In fact, a fellow Trekkie friend of mine, we sort of have this theory we've worked up that Spock is secretly a traitor, and that every time the ship is in jeopardy or whatever, and it so happens Spock's at the station when
Yeah.
something goes wrong. But no, I mean, Spock is there's always that sort of xenophobia mix in the original show that you're supposed to overcome, but the characters struggle with it. It's certainly there when they introduce the Romulans, and I suspect Spock because he looks like them, right? This racism. But then that scene, that idea is just completely dropped.
Yeah.
You could just totally forget that scene ever happened. But I love people trash those uniforms in this. I love the uniforms in this.
I
And I
agree.
love Spock's black Kolinar, like really just like Vulcan and alien. And those shots on Vulcan are, I watch them and I think they're so much better than the junk we get today, where you see the giant statues and this austere society that you're supposed to sort of venerate and like, but at the same time feel is cold and distant and fascistic in a way that makes you uncomfortable.
No, I agree. I was going to talk about the uniforms and the costuming in this, and because one of the things that drives me nuts about the Star Trek, and in fact it happens with a lot of franchises, is any militaristic franchise, when you go from film to film and the uniforms vary so wildly. Like whoever does the tailoring for the Federation wakes up and says, oh, today we're going to have huge epaulets and embroidery, and then and then 3 years later we're going to tone it down. I'm going to do body stockings today. It's all over the place, but I do kind
Good
of
news. We've got a new design.
Come on, it's wicked, and it's the thing is though, like the costuming again in this is really good. It's consistent. The one of the things I was looking for, and again, it's there were two things I was looking for in that scene that you mentioned when they're on the recreational deck, and Kirk addresses them all. Is there consistency between the uniform, or have they gone everybody's going to have different? And are there aliens? And actually, yes, the uniforms are all consistent. You can clearly see that there are people in specific uniforms that do specific duties. And even Kirk, like, because he's addressed them, he's in slightly different. But when he gets onto the deck later, he's now in a uniform that matches Decker, so he's wearing a fleet uniform, whatever. Yeah.
Uniform. Yeah.
And in that scene, there are several aliens in the background. Like, we're not talking.
And Andorian. There's an Andorian.
Yeah,
I love them.
You can see all this stuff. No, none of that appears on the bridge. Fine, but that's most likely down to budget, where they were like, we can't afford to have that person in a shot all the time. It costs money, so we'll have them in that one shot, and then we won't talk about it again. Like, I understand that. That's an issue of the era and the budget these films have, but they did it. They still have a shot where I can go, well, that person, that person, that person, that person are all wearing a white uniform with these certain things on the shoulders. That's fine. And those ones, they all match Scotty. And those ones, I'm like, great. I can see there is a consistency on this. It's been given thought, and I respect that. I completely respect it. So that I'm kind of digging the uniforms as well. Like, one of the things I like the fact that, again, talking about the wider franchise, when you watch like Enterprise, and it's supposed to be those early doors, the uniforms are more like jumpsuits. They're designed to be a bit more engineering, they're designed to be in that way. But by this point, they'd be like, no, we basically fly around in a yacht.
Yeah.
It's technology. We're basically on a luxury liner. We can wear whatever we want. We can look fabulous in these 70s disco suits. So no, I do. I think the costuming in this film is great.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I do. One of the questions that I to change the subject, one of the questions that I have about this film is, I love the whole V'ger thing. I love the unintended consequences. in that scene you were talking about when he addresses them and you have seen the other crew die, that other crew says that V'ger is enormous and measures 2 AU.
Yeah.
Now, I probably didn't know when I was a kid in the 80s, but that means that the diameter of V'ger is twice the distance from the sun to the Earth.
I did not know that.
That's an AU is an astronomical unit, right? So us being on Earth, 1 AU is the distance from the sun to the Earth. So that lets us say like, oh, okay, this planet is 7 AU out. You know, it gives you some idea. So that is how enormous. I mean, like, you know, and so when it's over Earth at the end, you were talking about like now. Look, it's mostly massless, right? I mean, you do see it's mostly hollow inside. Okay, fine, but still, it is so big that it would encompass Earth, you know, for Mercury, Venus, and Earth.
Well,
there
are planets inside it, aren't there?
Yes, the actual, you know, now are those digitized?
I didn't know.
Them? I don't know.
At one
I want
point,
that answered.
Yeah, I don't know, because that bit when Spock's sort of floating through, and he does, and you do see planets, and it looks cool. It does look really cool. But I was like, is he in sort of one of those sort of astronomy domes, you know, where they're projecting things onto a big ceiling? I don't know, but it looks cool. But yeah, that to know that it's that big is, you know, that's. I don't know whether I like that or not, to be honest.
Not in our solar system, right? I mean, at that point, it's just like.
It's a bit crowded.
You've ripped every planet out of its orbit, you know.
Yeah, because even
just by your gravity.
Like you say, even being massless, it's still an energy field, and it's still going to have that energy field is going to have an impact on other things around it. So yeah, that feels a little silly, but
yeah, right. I mean, you know, you're certainly even if Mars happens to be on the opposite side of the sun, you know, you certainly have asteroids. You know, there's a lot that is floating into V'ger. Yeah, I don't know. It's very weird. But that's never mentioned again, and you don't see a shot of like it in our solar system with like a tiny, tiny Earth. You just see the little probes.
Yeah.
But there again, it's the sense of stakes. Like you don't have you have that ticking timer, even though they don't really give you the stakes, but you also don't really see it outside of Earth.
No, and that comes down to this idea that you know you need like someone with a dramatic sense who have done a run over of the script to say this is actually, you know, can we tone this up or do this, and then they can happily argue with Gene Roddenberry. But let's talk about V'ger, because again I both like and I've questions about V'ger. So Voyager 6, clearly, you know, sent in space, fine. I love the fact it relates back to during the late 70s. We were still sending stuff into space. The space exploration, NASA was still very, very strong. So it feels relevant, and I love the fact that they did that. That's cool. Really good idea. This idea of Voyager being found after however how many years and by a technology planet or a robot planet or mechanical planet, what they call it. It's programmed.
Optimus Prime.
Yeah, basically, yeah, or at least the original primes, and then its basic programming being understood and then being sent back out with a bunch of kit is fascinating. I like it as an idea that this thing met. Or was found by an alien race, and they basically upgraded it and sent it back out again so it could fulfill its mission and return back. But then in doing so, it spent so long and was able to gather so much information that it became sentient. And again, like, you know, I'm loving all these ideas. I think it's a great sci-fi concept. Unfortunately, it refers to itself as V'ger because the badge on the side of it is covered in dirt. That bit I have a little bit of a problem with.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those classic revelations, right? Where, you know, I mean, it's got to be one of the best instance of this in all of sci-fi history, where you wipe off the thing,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, that was us. That was Voyager. I still, my problem was always, if they've upgraded it, could you not get a hose?
Yeah.
And also, like, does it have, I guess it's got cameras everywhere, so it's looking at its outside and seeing, Voyager. I mean, that bugs me a little, but that revelation works so well that
It does.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah, it's a nitpick. It's a nitpick, and I think because I know what it is, I'm a bit, because I've seen that revelation so many times. I'm like you. I'm like a sponge, not even a sponge. Kirk does it with spit on his thumb, basically, and I'm like, could someone not have figured that out? But what are your thoughts on this idea?
Also, look at the plaque, on the side of yourself. If you can see the V'ger, why do you not see, the naked human standing Da Vinci style, Vitruvian style?
That's true. Yeah. No, it's. But what are your thoughts on this idea of it gaining sentience? Gaining information and gaining sentience.
I love this. I mean, I love V'ger. And there was a comic done like a year or two ago of Star Trek and Transformers. They're doing all these crossovers, and they crossed over the animated Star Trek with Transformers, and they had like a space, USS Enterprise, the 1701 that transforms into I think it's Fortress Maximus. Yeah, I mean, it looks cool. I want that toy, by the way. It doesn't exist, but maybe I'll build it. But it seems to me like, no, like this is so ready for that story. Guess what? The planet that Voyager fell on was Cybertron. And you do get this kind of shot of a mechanical planet. So before any Transformers movies were made, before even Transformers was launched as a franchise, I've always been fascinated by AI and synthetic life and, issues of consciousness. And so I loved, that few seconds in all of these self-indulgent sequences of graphics, those few seconds where you see a robotic planet. And even though you never see, today we could actually do this with CGI, but you never see robotic life sort of finding V'ger and retooling him. And even though he's so unbelievably primitive, it's like, it's like a speak and spell, and they're like, well, your original intent. But it's like the original programming isn't seek out information and transmit it back. There is no protocol that tells you that, right? You're not an Isaac Asimov droid with, protocols, or RoboCop with protocols. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So they are looking at the speak and spell and going like, okay, here's how we understand its code and what it was for. Let's help this little primitive brother on its way, right? I mean, this is like us finding a microbe and being like, let's get that up to quadruped size and, figure out what that microbe wants, But I love this story. I think it's fascinating. I do think that I love how alien, the idea is. I love the idea that it sees, and this is another thing that I always think needs to be done better in Transformers, that it sees carbon-based life as an infestation, right? That, that's not the main thing. And, maybe it's a little silly because it certainly encountered lots of planets with carbon-based life. But so maybe that's a little silly, but it also reflects back at us how many people say, well, robotic life, well, that's not real life. Well, you get what you give. So I love all that stuff. What about you?
No, it's the same. I mean, there are certain moments, visual cues as well in this film, with regards to when they go into V'ger, the design of everything. It's got this blue hue to it all, and it's obviously all a model. It's all done, through different perspectives and models and sort of stuff. It looks fantastic. But one of the things that fascinates me the most, and we could speculate about this, is basically they stop in front of what can only be described as a huge robotic orifice. but it shifts and it looks like it's breathing and it moves, and it, like you say, it's so alien and weird. Like it doesn't seem to serve a purpose, and then you go through it, and it's yeah, all right, it's Spock going through it and gaining his truth. Like yeah, okay, it's a rebirthing, and that metaphor, fine, but it's just the design of all this is so. And then they find the center of this thing, and then there's Vija surrounded by this, plugged into this massive technology that like they can't understand. I love this idea that this thing that we shot off into space, because usually even at this point, I suppose it became more of a cliche later, is this idea of finding or receiving radio waves or television waves or whatever, and then that being the thing that impacts, and aliens coming down to Earth based on that. But this idea of them finding one of our first long-range satellites or probes into space and it being coming back is, I love it. But this idea of it looking for its creator and not willing to accept that what it deems as an inferior entity being its creator, when Kirk's like, well, we are your creator, and it's like, nah, you're
not real life forms.
Yeah, like not you scabby bunch of infections. Like I love that notion. It will not accept this idea that it believes either, I don't know whether it believes the planet itself is its creator or there's some other being there, but like it will not accept it. And this leads so yeah, I do love this idea of this thing gaining this sentience, but also it creating its own mythology.
Mm-hmm.
In this time, it's not fact. It has created this idea of the creator, and so it's just as we do. We create these mythologies, these creation myths. It has done exactly the same. And when confronted with fact, there is no great deity. I'm not going to start questioning people's religion, but there's no great being or this ultra dimensional being or whatever. It's just you were created by humans, and you had this encounter, and you are now returning. Like that's what happened. It's not millions of years; it's only hundreds of years. I love that this thing actually created its own creation myth. Mm-hmm. Now, this brings me to one question though: when they input the code to return the information, so Spock gets it and they start reciting the code, or Decker starts reciting the code, and it doesn't work. And they look inside, and one of the wires is broken. Now, this is weird because I don't know. Did it do it itself, or was that already broken?
No, they say it did it itself. Right.
I thought that was the case.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that
it doesn't want to hear the truth, baby.
Because that's when I love exactly this is my point. Because when confronted with fact, McCoy puts it best and says, "The toddler is having a tantrum."
Yes.
And I love the fact that, it's got all this vast galactic knowledge. It's gained all this information, yet it's still an immature being, despite that. And like you say, when confronted with the logic of its actual creation, doesn't want to hear it. Literally pulls the plug in petulance, and I love that. I think that's all fascinating because that's so human.
Well, the whole thing of it being a child is fascinating. And I love what you're saying about, I always thought, how did it burn that wire out? And it looks, I sort of have a minor gripe about that sort of, how is it equipped to do that? Is there a burnout mechanism that, you've stitched a little notch in that wire, so that's where it explodes? I don't know. But it's a very minor gripe. But yeah, it occurs to me that, there are these episodes in the original series where there's this one that's very parallel to this, where a probe is found, and that probe is like half the height of a human, and it kind of like floats around the set, and they have to convince it not to destroy the Enterprise. And then even Khan is found in Space Seed in, ships that we sent out. So there is this sort of like trope of finding old ships in Star Trek from Earth that then become a problem somehow. But I think this is the most fascinating version of it. And the other thing is about religion. And it seems to me that even these ponderous shots are almost religious.
Mm.
There's a kind of like religious awe given to V'ger. And yet he's this child. But, you know, there is this, Roddenberry was an atheist.
Yeah.
And it's clear that in Star Trek, some people have private religions, but, you know, religion isn't a big thing, right? You know,
Yeah.
nobody is saying, you know, well, whether we interfere in this planet or not, let's ask what would Jesus do, right? I mean, that's completely alien from Star Trek. And so here is this being who's searching for questions, searching for its creator, has made up, as you say, its own mythology. And yet that mythology, much like the episode of the original series with Adonis, who, you know, with Apollo, who, you know, it's like the Greek gods were aliens kind of way before the Thor movies, you know, and done better. But, you know, that was a slight against religion in some way. Here, it's like this movie has a respect for the religious impulse and for that desire to, you know, there's this constant questioning of like, is this all I am? Is this what is life about? You know, is it about Kolinahr and becoming perfected, quote unquote, according to the Vulcan norm? Or do I find my own meaning? And they don't go enough into that journey of Spock's. But Voyager is asking those same questions. And that, I think this movie respects that religious impulse, respects a kind of mystical impulse, perhaps more than a religious impulse, and finds that it has physical basis, right? That our myths aren't just, you know, willy-nilly, let's make up, but that they are an attempt to answer this desire in us that is so innate that even a robotic life would feel it.
Well, I think one of the things, it does, because this film, I think you're right, it wants to keep bringing things down to an explanation, like a base level. Forget the idea of God, because at no point did they say, like you say, religion is you know, completely devoid in this world. But like, even like Kolinahr, this idea of logic, of being purging yourself of all emotion and becoming a pure being of logic. Yes, it's not based around a creator myth. Still a religion.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
like Taoism is a religion. Doesn't say anything about gods.
Yeah, exactly. It's still a cultural religious belief that, you know, that you are following a certain sect to a point where, you know, a ceremony gives you a talisman to show that you have achieved a level. You know, you might as well be rolling one of your trousers legs up and shaking hands funny or something. You know, like, it's no different to all these other things. What I like about V'ger, though, that I find most fascinating, is he is looking for his creator. It. You know, it is looking for its creator, and it will not accept this idea of the carbon-based life forms. However, V'ger in and of itself is a creator.
Mm-hmm.
It takes Ilia and then replaces her, replicates her with this robotic being, and with this little thing on. But even so, when they scan her, they're like, actually, yeah, it's this, but it's so accurate.
Mm-hmm.
It may actually contain her memories and her emotions. This thing is so good.
Like, it's reproduced her down to the nerve endings, right?
Yeah,
like, it's amazing.
Like, and so, you know, like, this is a replicant level, whatever. And so, yeah, weirdly, like, you know, and again, she is not the Ilia that comes back, the drone or droid, whatever you want to call it, isn't a mouthpiece for V'ger. It's not V'ger speaking through this being. They're not talking directly to V'ger. She is independent of V'ger as this drone. So V'ger has created a separate being. So V'ger in and of himself is a creator.
Right. She's like onto a Voyager probe that's been sent out to get information and then return it back to the creator.
It becomes this cycle, and then again, the cycle continues, because at the end, it's Ilia as a being Not Vija. I'm not sure. I've got some questions about the ending, about what it is that actually merges with Decker, but then they go off to become this greater being and stuff. But I love the fact that, like, yeah, this creator thing is a cycle. Like, it goes on. Like, if anything, Vija is greater than us. It's grown to become better. It has this ability. And so, yeah, no, I love all this. I think this whole thing is fascinating, this idea. But then, like you say, to bring it down to the fact that you go past this massive ship, this huge mass of energy and power, and then this huge technological advancement to find this shonky thing that was fired out into space and has less memory than my phone.
Yes.
Is amazing. They bring it down to this thing, yet this thing has evolved to be able to replicate life. Is great. Should say it seemed to the costume she wears. Did Vija create that, or is that something they give her? Because
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. It seems to me that doesn't she, like, it's kind of implied she arrives nude, and they sort of
they basically give her a handtail to wear.
Yeah.
It's one of the only things. It's a flaw, or it's a nitpick I have with this film. And again, I know you're saying about this idea of sort of sex positive. But the clothing they give her it's not just about being sex positive, like, it's clearly sexualizing her.
Right. Well, I mean, this is look. I mean, I'm saying it's two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look, you've got the Orion slave girls in the original show, right? And I mean, so it's like, yes, they're slaves, and obviously Federation officers are fine with fornicating with slaves, right? But it's this weird thing Roddenberry does, where there is sort of sexual exploitation on these shows, and look, we may not have interpersonal conflicts, but we're still horny as hell.
The reason they are so horny is because they are repressed.
Well, but they're not repressed anymore, right? I mean, but they're repressed, and they're like, I'm not going to hit that commander, but when I get to those Orion girls. So I mean, look, I mean. Yeah, I think that it's two sides of the same coin. I think that the pendulum is swung, and now we see it as more, titillation and female oppression, especially from the behind the scenes stories. But, so look, I mean, you're right. And she's, really the one defining characteristic of her character is that she's from a culture that has sex at the drop of a hat. I mean, it's not, and she misses Decker, right? I mean, like, that's all we know about her as a person.
She's not given any real depth of a backstory. But what I would say is, again, interestingly, like, she's clearly, she's stunning. Like, she's fantastic figure, wonderful legs, amazing legs. But like, they're like, but we're gonna make her bald because that's alien. And you're like,
I love that. I love that look.
Oh, it looks great. No, but that's my problem with it. I'm like, it's not alien enough. Like, she still looks really hot. Like,
well, I think they want her to look hot, right?
Yeah, of course they do. Yeah.
And I don't know that there's anything wrong with that. I don't think that, it's like we were talking about, not to bring it back to Space Dandy, but that's sort of like, we were talking, sometimes we talk about the Michael Bay Transformers movies, where it's like, why does this need to have an ass shot here? It's not necessary. But look, in the same sense that, like, the original series was selling you on the fight scenes, right? That's part of the appeal. It's not cerebral. There's going to be a cerebral through line, but we're also going to give you those fight scenes. We're also going to give you a little bit of titillation. And we know that this is, like you said, this is made for people today. We're not in this utopian culture. And I think that, I'm sex positive. I want everyone to be who they are. And I have no problem with pornography. I have no problem with any sort of titillation, whether it's of a guy or a girl or some other gender. Go for it. So I feel like, I don't want to, like, condemn that, but I know what you're saying. Like, it's a kind of like two-dimensional character, and I really want to watch Star Trek Phase 2 that has her as a character and kind of culminates in this.
Exactly, and that's my point. I mean, if she is given that uniform or those clothes, and this is why I want to talk about the costuming, because everyone's got this. They've got this. It's not militaristic, but it's clearly sort of designed to be standardized and functional within the ship. She turns up and they dress her, and she's wearing these fantastic sort of like silver high heels, and this this mini dress. It looks great. It's really well designed and everything. Like, she just looks fantastic. But at some point, like you're saying, like if you're going to live in the world of this film, someone had that. Secondly, someone chose to put her in it. And I'm thinking it's McCoy personally, but
blame the doctor.
Yeah, but it's that thing of like, again, functional would have probably been they give us something else. It's a real. We talk about too much for what it is. It's a nitpick. She looks great, and it's a cool costume. Like all the costume in this, I think, is really cool.
Yeah.
But the point is, like I say, she looks the thingy. But one of the things I wanted to ask about Ilya, the drone. Because she starts as a robot, like as in that she's just there as a functioning drone, and she regains at least in part some of her former memories or former feelings. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that, and how it happens?
Well, I mean, first of all, about to end that costuming thing. Look, I mean, anyone can feel how they feel about this. I'm not going to shut down. A woman or anyone who has an opposing view. I sort of take it as one of the tropes of the series, right? In the same way that sometimes I get irritated. Why, like, do you not have anyone else who can save the Federation except for Kirk and Picard? Like, how many times have they saved the universe? Surely you have some other competent commanders, but that's part of the romance of the show. And in the same way, I was thinking as you were talking about the mini skirts of the original uniform. It's like today that seems completely sexist. And what is the function of seeing that high of a woman's legs when she's just as part of, supposed to be respected as part of the crew? But it's like, we respect women, but we all kind of like it. I don't know. I mean, it's a sort of, you're completely correct. But, about her kind of like regaining it. I sort of feel regaining her emotion or her memory. I want more of it. I love and I think, it's just what you were saying about how these plots are sort of muted. And I think that I want that plot. I want more of it, especially because I want Decker's choice to stay with her to be characterized better. Mm-hmm. But she does so much with the look on her face. Like I am moved by that look of pain on her face as this android version of her is coming to life and realizing I love him and we're leaving forever or whatever she's thinking at that time. I identify with her. I just want more of all of that stuff.
No, I completely agree. That's the thing. Like the ending of this film, I want it to be a real sort of like both sad but like massively triumphantly uplifting as well. And that's how it should feel. This sort of coming together of these two beings to become something, greater than all of us, and this sort of sacrifice that Decker is making and to be with this thing and all this stuff. If this was like the climax of like, like say several seasons show where you've followed that journey of like Decker spending time on the planet and having that affair, and like you say, in this future world, sort of like trying to control that idea of whether it be lust or love or whatever, these emotions and this growing thing, then having to come together again on this ship and work together. And, Decker's having to balance this thing of like, my authority's been usurped, but I've got this, and also I've now got this being or this entity I love, so, I'm now attracted to, and it's really confusing. If you were to be taken on this journey of these characters that then ends with them on this, like that would be hugely satisfying. And so that's why I'm sort of like, I both like, because I love the ending, but I'm also really disappointed where I'm like, I want more. Like that look, you're right, that look she gives, or when Ilya sort of looks at him and that makes his, like, sort of seems to make his mind up. But like, But there's never a conflict. There's no point where he's like, I can't do that, or I shouldn't do that, or it's not going to happen. He's more like, yeah, no, I want this. And I'm going, I don't know why. You didn't seem too miffed when she left. And then you didn't seem particularly bothered when she came back as a robot. Like, I don't see what the problem, like, what why is it you are now? Your dialogue does not match the behaviors I've seen. And that's sort of a bit of a problem.
Decker is the biggest problem there because, because up until, she comes back as an android, his central stress, his central conflict is having his command taken away from him, right? And so he wants to command the Enterprise. He wants to, he was ready to go out in space as the new commander of the Enterprise. That's been stripped away from him. And so there is this weird way, like, instead of getting any characterization of their relationship, I always have felt like there's a part of me that hates to think this, but that he's like, yeah, I have these feelings for her, and they were activated by her dying and this android version of her coming back. But you know what? Screw the Federation. They took my ship away from me, so I guess I'll just do this. And you're right. I mean, it's not characterized. I do think that, like, you were talking about the effects of that being characterized, and I think there's, like, again, you're talking about, like, sort of being 10 degrees off. I kept thinking as we were talking about religion, about, like, Prometheus and this idea and Alien Covenant, which I like Prometheus, but this idea of sort of like the engineers, like, created us, which is dumb. And then we created, these amazing androids, and these amazing androids still had this desire to create, and they went out and they created, the xenomorphs, and this sort of chain. Well, you've got that.
One day we'll talk about those, and I will really go on about how dumb that whole thing is.
Well, but there's a searching for getting at something there that, even if it doesn't work in those movies, and I would probably agree with you that it doesn't. I mean, they're trying to do something. Yeah. This movie is kind of more successful at that, but it doesn't underline those things. Having V'Ger realize that it is also a creator, that we created V'Ger, and V'Ger is also a creator and has made this next thing that is partially human, would play with that plot, would, get at some of that. And I think in the same way, having more of that characterization of Ilya, and, and having, it would be so easy just to have some dialogue where somebody says, like, well, you're oversexed. And she says, well, my people believe that when you merge physically with somebody, you can be enhanced by the experience and grow closer to what you don't understand by the experience. And this is religious to us. This isn't just getting hot and dirty. This has a deeper meaning that then, without putting, you have to be careful not to be right on the nose, but then, it seems to me, obviously, the uniting of Decker and Ilya is sexual at the end. But because none of this has been characterized, we don't really know why Decker does it. And it comes off as like, golly gee, another interesting, weird thing happened at the end of that Star Trek episode, instead of really hitting those through lines.
Yeah, and I think that's a real shame, because, again, like, some of the character bits should be there. Like, you should have. And again, like, we could do this by not spending 8 minutes looking at the ship, but there should be a scene where Decker and Ilya do reconnect, and in it she should be saying, like, oh, well, how do you feel about Kirk taking your command, and he should be like, there should be not resentment. I don't want him to be like, yeah, what a prick. I don't want him doing that. It should be like, no, he has a point. He has the experience. However, I think there is a resentment that you should be showing that to bring, and her comforting him brings them closer together. For her to then be taken away should be a gut punch. That should be the point. And you're right. This idea of sort of like almost to the point of like Crowleyan sex magic of like, this idea of the connection, it is almost magical. Like we learn something. There's just like
that glow is technically orgone, right?
yeah, exactly. But you could make connections in a similar way that like Spock tries to do a mind merge with the thing. There's, that Vulcans can do that they can have this idea of a mind merge because they are all about the mind. They are pure logic. They even call it a mind merge. All right, for Ilya's race, have this thing of we call it not heart merge. That's too stupid. But like this idea of emotion. We share emotion. We're almost the opposite of Vulcans in that we're not whole emotion, but like through this act of sensual connection, we are able to expand our beings and feel empathy. This side of empathy. Donna Troy comes in. In Next Gen.
Deanna
Troy.
I was going to mention her because she was originally conceived as an Ilya character who was hypersexed, and they got Roddenberry to tone that down, thankfully.
And so I can see this idea of sort of empathy or connectivity being an important point, and then she is robbed of that to become a droid, and she regains it, and then when in her regaining it, she's able to reconnect with, and that moment of pain at the end then has more of an emphasis. It's more of a gut punch again. When you're like, she's regaining that, and that can be Decker saying, "No, I see my purpose now. Like I have a connection with her." And we are now the moment that we can save Earth, we can create this new species, and they gain what they want. Boom. I'm in tears. Kirk's cheerful. Like, that to me is brilliant. Screw Roddenberry.
Well, but what's fascinating to me is how all of this is there. It's all there. Right. It's just, it writes itself, and yet they never go that extra step. Remember, there's that weird scene with Ilya where Chekhov is hurt by the exploding console and his hand is burned up, and she comes over and takes his pain away. That's exactly what you're talking about like the emotional Vulcan. She literally in the show, in the movie, she takes his pain away. So she can do that for Decker. She is the emotional at the end. She could have a line about, taking pain away. I mean, this is all right there. It's in the material, and yet they never go up and touch it.
And that's the problem. Like I said, this film is just a couple of degrees away from being what's
masterpiece.
Exactly, yeah, an absolute stone cold. And it makes me wonder, if they'd have gone for this, how different the Trek franchise would be. Because
well, I mean, I don't know, because it did well enough that they got a sequel, with a lower budget. But I guess if they had, the question is, how well would it have done if it were even more of an artsy fartsy indulgent masterpiece than they produced?
No, I don't think. I don't think it would have been. You see, I think though, because it's that line again. Like I say, you can have those external shots, those fantastic model shots, and indulge in all that. And I think they look great. I think I love that kind of shit. I love those kind of special effects. But if you can put real heart at the center of this. Consider that this is the 70s as well. Yes, you've had the Star Trek. The Star Wars kind of franchise has been birthed and has hit the world like a sledgehammer. But there were still Trek fans, and they obviously it's this thing of the pendulum, isn't it? They sort of said, we're not going to be Star Wars. We're going to swing the pendulum, and I think they swung it too far in one direction. And then obviously the correction is the Wrath of Khan, like they come the other way. There is somewhere between Wrath of Khan and motion picture where this film should exist. And I think in a 70s in a 70s market, late 70s, early 80s film market, where you have films like Close Encounters, E.T., both Spielberg films, I should say, but and I'm not saying it should be a Spielberg film. I don't want that level of schmaltz or anything like that, but enough heart that you can relate to the characters, and so
Well,
when you get the finale, it feels like a win.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, look, in fairness, I mean, you're also talking about setting up that sense of stakes, you know, and serious drama stuff. I mean, I think all of this kind of comes down to a better written version of this. And I mean, they were altering. I mean, they had the original. You could still buy, and I did as a kid. You know, the Phase 2 scripts that would have been shot.
Oh,
Some
really?
were adapted into next gen, and you know, the first two. I mean, I think this should be. You know, if we can retronym damn Star Wars Episode 1 as Episode 4, A New Hope, we can retronym this as Star Trek in Thy Image, which sets up the religious connotation stuff right away. But, I mean, they were rewriting this on set. I mean, this was... But I do think there is a... You know, you're incredibly correct that there is a better written, teased out version of this that would have more heart. And it's not bad to reference Spielberg because, you know, Spielberg is a master filmmaker. Sometimes it goes schmaltzy, but he is fantastic at getting that emotional through line and making sure that people connect emotionally to film. And this is a movie that does not seem to understand that people connect emotionally to film.
Or to one another, for that matter. So, yeah. It's interesting. You know, it's a thing of like, and that's the frustrating thing about this. I have the novelization of all of the Trek films, the movie novelizations, because I'm a movie novelization nerd. I love them. I haven't read the motion picture novelization. I've read Wrath of Khan. It's good. It's kind of fun because the film's fun. You know, and it gives you, and often the thing with novelizations is you get these sort of like little divergent things where they'll give you what's going on in someone's mind, or they can, you know, you get a scene from a different perspective because it's, you know, closer to a shooting script than it is actually to what was shot. These kind of things. The editing will be different, whatever. I'm curious now to go back and read the motion picture novelization because it's just shy of 300 pages. And so I'm thinking like, all right, if they got stuff in there, like, is there going to be stuff of like from Ilya or Decker or something? This internal monologue.
Well, they can't spend 20 pages going on the shuttlecraft just describing. They're not going to do that, right? And
you don't know.
By Alan Dean Foster.
I would have to.
Because I mean, he's an amazing writer.
Alan Dean Foster's novelizations are fantastic. I've read Aliens. He actually did the Transformers the A one as well. So
he had written for the Peter Pan records of Star Trek, some of which like they should just straight up adapt as animated, you know, shorts. Everything that he wrote for Star Trek was really good, and he wrote several of the like episode sort of the animated episode novelizations and stuff, and he would expand them and make stuff make sense that does not make, frankly, makes no sense in those animated episodes. But he has an important role in Trek history, not just for this movie, but I mean,
it says on here, right, and I've got to find out if it really is. There you go. It says this book is sometimes erroneously credited to Alan Dean Foster. However, Foster only contributed to the film's story. The novelization based on the screenplay was solely written by Roddenberry. Okay. So do not be surprised if it does have an 8-page section venerating the ship. I do believe he wrote the rest, though. So I'm going to check Wrath of Khan. But this is great podcasting.
Well, yeah, apparently it does. The book does acknowledge that Decker is the son of Commander Matt Decker from the Doomsday Machine.
Yeah. So so it's interesting to see. So
so it was written by Roddenberry, supposedly, or his assistants and stuff.
Yeah, Vonda N. McIntyre did the did the Wrath of Khan one. So so I find them fascinating. So I am going to look into that. But it's so like we said, there's definitely a version of this film that I think that hits it out of the park. does that
Oh,
mean
yeah.
like the thing is, like you say, it doesn't mean I dislike this film. I know I've been ribbing on it and I've been taking the mick out of it, and there's things real. It has got flaws, and there's definitely a better version of it. But I do kind of really like this film.
Me too. Yeah, no, I think it's a good film. I mean, I think it tries for stuff. Does it always succeed? No, but it comes close enough that we can see a version of it that is a masterpiece. Is it a masterpiece? No, not in its current version, but it tries for something. You know, and thinking about this as the first Star Trek picture, it strikes me as even more ambitious, you know, in the wake of Star Wars. That, you know, I mean, I keep thinking, like, if you don't know Star Trek, so much of this is unemotional, and so much of this is kind of like you have to already care about Kirk to be like, okay, he's getting the Enterprise back. You have to care about the Enterprise for that sequence, that, you know, 3-minute sequence or whatever it is of like
20 minutes, I don't know, 45 minutes. I think.
No, there is actually a version with CGI that, you know, that I prefer slightly, that has like the CGI, some CGI added to like this Starfleet command. You know, you see the sand, so, you know, all the matte paintings are kind of enhanced with stuff. But yeah, they should do a better version of this. You know, but I mean, no, this is ambitious, and I don't know how they thought it would be as successful, you know, as they must have wanted it to be, because you really have to love Star Trek to even care about the Enterprise and Kirk and Spock. And I want, you know, one thing I didn't mention when we were talking about a better version is Spock discussing the effects of merging with V'ger, because it seems as if he's encountered a purely logical mind that does not even understand feelings. And it's in response to that he's crying, and he says he is as I was when I boarded, that he's like gone through his whole journey of like, I thought Kolinahr would be the purging of emotion. But in fact, as has always been acknowledged on the show, we Vulcans are emotional beings.
Yeah.
And now that I've actually encountered pure logic, I can acknowledge the emotion in myself, and I can't pretend that I could purge it or would want to. I'm not going to want to become V'ger. That's some profound shit. Where is that?
Yeah, well, it's sort of, there's this weird discussion at the end, and it feels a little bit like the end of those episodes, you know, where they do have, you know, Kirk send off. You know, there's that sort of. But they have this moment where they talk about it, and McCoy has a great line, which is, you know, did we just see the creation of a new species? And they are all in wonder. And they're like, yeah, I think so, but not one we've ever seen before. This thing's like an interdimensional, like, we don't know what it is. And then, you know, they ask about the death toll, or the, you know, they want to report back, and Kirk says, you know, they're not dead, they are missing, which is, you know, it's got a little bit of weight to it, because they aren't dead, they've merged into this new thing. Great. But then when they're talking about it, and they talk about it being this combination of you know, pure logic and all the flaws of the human race that come with it, and I'm going, what flaws? Because what you've presented is these evolved beings that have past bitterness and spite and all this other thing. So there are no flaws. So you can't have this argument now. And this is the thing, it sort of undermines Spock's thing of logic when you don't have the ballsy bravado of Kirk and the curmudgeonly compassion of McCoy. If you do elevate all of them to this level of sort of, like, you know, maturity, if you will, it doesn't make any sense. You need them to be, each one needs to be you know, have their failings, their flaws in their own way. You know, Spock being too logical is a flaw, because he can't have, you just get this sort of like Kantian philosophy of, like, you know, sacrifice the few to save the many, and, you know, but you want Kirk saying, no, I shall save them all, and all, you know, this other thing, and that's the idea. But if you elevate them all, it doesn't work. And that's, again, you take away the conflict. And it's bizarre, this ending where they're like, well, there's, and all the human failings that go with it. And it's like, you haven't
What failings
shown,
have been presented in this movie?
you haven't shown any. And so again, it's sort of like, they want their cake and eat it. And it just, and then you have Kirk saying, like, basically, I weirdly, I think he's stealing the ship at the end. I get there's an admiral or a captain of the ship, and he's like, so where to? Instead of reporting back after this for a debrief after this massive event where they've created new life, he's like, out there. Let's go out there. It's like, hang on.
Yeah, there should be like a little. I mean, that's the classic ending, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's start at the right and straight on till morning. But when it's these sort of like, okay, well, we've got the crew back together, and this love of adventure and the unknown, and what and I believe in this, and what mankind should find, humanity rather should find in outer space. That this is our destiny. It will change us. Great. But maybe report into Starfleet before,
Yeah. No, yeah, it's a bit stupid. Anyway, so that really is, we've been talking about Star Trek: The Motion Picture. So any final thoughts then, really, on this film?
Yeah, I mean, this is very close to being a masterpiece. It's clearly not, but I mean, I do love it, and I love how ambitious it is and philosophical, and it is amazing to me how close. I mean, you and I could rewrite this and just make this so good.
Yeah, I think that's my final thought on this. It's good, and I actually do enjoy it. And it's 2 hours 12 minutes, and it weird thing. I thought my Blu-ray had broken when I watched this because it starts with one of the longest musical intros, to the extent that when I skip to scene 1 is just this black box of sort of the music, and then it's like, oh, and now the intro. And so it loves its score, and I will say again, you said the Jerry Goldsmith score on this is phenomenal. I absolutely love it. To the extent it became the theme tune for Next Gen. But yeah, again, but on this film, like, there's so much about this film. Like, when I'm watching it, 2 hours 12 minutes, that I'm like, I'm not bored per se. I'm enjoying the film, but my head is constantly saying, I would do this, or this needs to be slightly different, or why aren't they doing this? And it's sort of, and it's just slightly frustrating. And I often think, and I thought about it actually when I'd watched it this time, I thought, if I was working at Paramount as an executive, and Gene Roddenberry says, I've done my film, it's edited, it's done, I want to show you what you're presenting this summer. And some executive sits down thinking Star Wars and watches this. I think there were some nervous people in Paramount in 1979 as the thing hit cinemas. I am sure of it.
Oh yeah. Well, and then they said, we're going to take this out of your hands, and they took it out of Roddenberry's hands for the second. So maybe someday we'll talk about that, and that is a masterpiece. This is a near one.
Yes. Yeah.
But
we will definitely talk about Wrath of Khan because there's so much to talk about in that film as well. And we will talk about one of the things I love about Trek more so, and think because it's got the pedigree of all these things, is that it has got these sort of things where it reaches back into these episodes. Like you say, I didn't know anything about that Decker is linked with a previous episode. It's there. And again, like you said, if you don't know, if you haven't watched the show, there are parts of this film that make no sense. And the same with 2, though. Like, when I was a kid, I had no idea that Khan was linked with a previous episode. And obviously, I know now and I've seen it and everything.
Well,
but
and that they're referencing something in their past, but you don't need to have seen that episode.
No, it's good. Right? Yeah, you don't. Yeah, you can completely accept the film on its own merits and its own terms, but to know that it's actually a sequel to an episode is even better.
Yeah.
So it's definitely worth. We will, in fact, I think we should put that in as a promise.
Well, I mean, I always have a love-hate relationship with the sort of Star Trek movies. I'm a huge Trekkie, but a lot of the movies, in being more action-oriented, I sometimes feel it isn't, the true Star Trek, right? For whatever the hell that means. I mean, presumptuous of me. But the thing about Trek is that Trek uses science fiction to get at ideas and to get at social issues and to get at things that are more than just, I've got a lightsaber, now watch this cool fight, which is awesome. Enjoy it. God bless you. But and this, more than any of the Trek movies, tries to be that. And I think that is awesome and admirable, and so much of what I love about science fiction and what it can be.
No, I agree. And I love this franchise. I've got all the Trek films. I think watching this and talking about it, I'm definitely more of a Trekkie than a Star Wars fan. Like it's definitely the case. I more than anything, I really thought about this because I think it's relevant. Which was I was like, what was the first Star Trek thing I ever saw? And weirdly, I think Star Trek 3 is the first thing of Trek I ever saw. And I remember being a kid and being very confused. Very confused.
I don't blame you.
Yeah. And then after watching 4, so I remember watching 3 and 4, and then watching 4 and going like, I'm still confused, like, but I'm really enjoying this thing of these people in 1985, in basically this weird 80s comedy romp. And then I've gone back and I've watched obviously the original series and the rest. And I don't know, there's just something appealing about the original cast doing these films, good or bad, good, bad or indifferent. Like those first sort of 6 films, I have an affection for all of them.
Yeah, so, I just wish there were more. I mean, I just like, so much time passes between 1 and 2 in universe, between 5 and 6 in universe. There's been some fan-made stuff, but I mean, we didn't get phase 2, and so I feel like we didn't get a proper conclusion to the 5-year mission. We get the animated series. I mean, I have a roadmap to how to do this all, by the way, because I'm insane. That's like my Fox plan. I have a Star Trek plan, but I always end up feeling like I like these 6 movies, but it feels like there's all this connective tissue between them that's kind of missing. And I want those slow moments on Vulcan. I want those quiet human scenes that these movies mostly can't afford.
Well, IDW have done that. In fact, didn't they do sort of like the 5-year mission, like year 4,
year 5,
year 5 and stuff? So they've done those sort of things, and I hear they're good. I've not read them, but I hear they're good. So okay. Yeah,
I mean, there's some that's better than others, but.
And also, like you say, Trek has probably crossed over with some of the weirdest things as well. There is a fantastic novel. I think it's 2 novels, but it's 2. Trek crossed over with the X-Men twice.
Yes, and there were two comics as well. They made comics of that because what I really want is I want the I kind of do mean this. It's like I want Jean-Luc Picard to meet Professor X, also played by Patrick Stewart.
Oh, who doesn't want that? Because that'd be amazing. But like, there are comics of one I really want to read. There's a really good. I've only read the first one, but there's Star Trek crossed over with Green Lantern, which was quite good. And then there was a Star Trek that crossed over, Next Gen crossed over with Matt Smith, Doctor Who, and I've not read it. And you know what? It's really hard to find. Annoyingly hard to find. I really want to read that.
And more recently, they've kind of embraced this, and they're doing like they did Terminator. They're doing Back to the Future. Oh yeah, there's a. Oh no, that's I'm thinking Transformers. Okay.
Oh, Transformers.
Never mind. We'll edit this part out because I'm dumb.
I still want those as well because I think the Transformers crossing over with Back to the Future was good. Transformers crossing over Ghostbusters was good. IDW just like they've created this factory of crossovers that everybody's gone like, these are awesome, and I love them. So
I do want the Star Trek crossovers with those two though.
Yeah, And so I think there's more to this franchise and stuff. So I do think we'll come back to it.
Oh, yeah.
But you're right. We'll definitely come to Wrath of Khan one day at least. But anyway, as always, thank you very much, Julian, for talking Star Trek
Thanks,
with us. I
you.
think this has been a cracking episode.
Absolutely.
And ladies and gentlemen, if you want to come and give us your thoughts on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, do you love it? Do you hate it? Is it as boring? Do you think it's boring? And do you miss it? Miss it out when you watch all the Star Trek films back? Or do you love Star Wars more than Trek and you actually think we've been talking nonsense? Let us know. Come find us on Twitter at PodTimeSpace. Happy to talk with any fans and whatever your thoughts are. If you really like what we're doing, go onto your podcast catcher and leave a review. These two guys really know their stuff. Wonderfully charismatic and cool. That's what we are.
I listened to this for Julian. No, we love those comments. I mean, and they really help get the podcast out.
They do. Yes. Raise us up. Let people more know what we're talking about. And if you really, really like what we're doing, go find us under the 20th Century Geek Media banner on Patreon. Patreon.com/20cg/media. And you'll find that we do a load of stuff on there. Me talking sort of 30-minute thoughts every month, and Creators Corner once a quarter, and once a week, me and Julian trekking our way through the Twilight Zone. We're working our way through the original 1959 series. We're still going through the first series. We've got, I think, sort of like 9 episodes out now.
Yeah.
So 9 or 10 episodes out. Go check them out. They're fantastic. It's just that is even at our lowest tier. Go check out some really cool episodes there. But it supports.
It occurred to me that coming up next is Buckaroo Banzai. On the regular on this podcast. But it occurred to me that so much of what we do, a big percentage of it is the Twilight Zone stuff now, and it's like certainly more episodes are Twilight Zone because we do shorter episodes there, but at least a third of the recording time we spend watching and doing Twilight Zone stuff. And so if you're getting this and you're not on that Patreon, man, a few dollars really helps, and you're missing out on half the story.
Yeah, we do some fantastic stuff on there, and it's like you say, Julian is sort of like the man in the know. He's seen a lot of this more. I'm the novice. I'm coming to a lot of these episodes sort of brand new for me, and it's a great journey, some great discussion. So go and check that out. That's it's patreon.com/20cg media. It'll be in the notes below on the show anyway. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. Because even if you don't do all that stuff and you're just listening, we love you anyway. Because we love, we hope you're enjoying it. As Julian says, next episode is another doozy. We've got it's sort of we've done our thoughtful bits. We did Eyes Without a Face. We did The Man Who Fell to Earth and the Star Trek: The Motion Picture. We've done philosophy.
That's snooty stuff.
We've done our sort of the intellectual stuff. Now, we're going to do Buckaroo Banzai and his adventures across the 8th dimension.
And you're the expert here, because I have never seen Buckaroo Banzai.
That's right. Yeah.
I understand Buckaroo Banzai mostly through the references in Ready Player One and other stuff.
Yes, there's a lot of references, but I'm fascinated to see what you think of this film. For the next podcast, I'll have watched the film, I've read the novelization, I've read the comic, so I am fully prepared to discuss Buckaroo Banzai, and I still may not be able to explain parts of the plot. So,
well, and I'm a virgin, so
yeah. Oh yeah, it'll be interesting. It's going to be interesting. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we shall talk again next time.